different factors come together to fortify an economy and stimulate business environment. In Nigeria, there has been a recent reawakening of the role of fraud examiners in the nation's economy. The President and Chief Learning Advisor, African Business School and Institutes of Fraud Examiners, His Royal Majesty Godi Edeminabo Edekisime Olua, joins us via Zoom, and want to say thank you very much, Doctor. I know that name was not easy coming by, so I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us on Africa Weekly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so can we just begin this way? I need you to help us put into proper perspective, what fraud examination is all about.
Well, thank you very much. Fraud examination is simply the process of investigating, analyzing evidence. Now to detect and prevent, and as well as mitigate fraud activities. Now, it involves a very comprehensive review, sometimes of financial and non-financial data,
okay,
as well as interviews with individuals,
okay,
and then analysis of documents and records. Now, let me quickly say here that fraud examiners use various techniques, which includes data analysis, that is, reviewing financial statements, transactions, and other data to identify suspicious patterns or anomalies. Now, they also get involved in interviews, that is, conducting interviews with individuals who may have information about that alleged fraud.
Okay.
Now, they do also more of document reviews, analyzing documents such as contract, papers, invoices, and receipts to identify potential evidence of fraud.
Okay. Okay.
Now, fraud examination is not, let me quickly say this, fraud examination is not a job for new of us, not for beginners, because it involves so many things.
Okay.
But let me quickly say this, because the primary goals of a fraud examiner, that is very, very important.
Okay.
Is 1, detection, 2, prevention, and 3, mitigation. Now, when we're talking about detection, you go into identifying fraud activities and the perpetrators. Now, if you talk about the prevention, you are talking about implementing measures to prevent further or future activities of fraud. Now, whether we like it or not, fraud cannot be eradicated in this world, because right from the beginning of the world, there have been fraud. If you remember, for those of them who are Bible scholars, one evening God came and he asked Adam, where are you? And the man said that he had to hide himself because he had committed fraud. When you take something that does not belong to you, it is fraud. So the fraud examiners work in various industries, both in the accounting and auditing firm,
Okay.
Law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, government agencies, and private companies. Now, it is important before we go into because it's important that for me to tell us a little bit about these most common frauds
Okay.
the common ones. Now, under the financial fraud, that's where we have, because these things are beginning to manifest on daily basis. Now, because the country is now moving into electronic banking and all that. So we have what we call their identity theft. That's stealing personal information to access financial accounts or credit. And another one that is more rampant now, because about 2 or 3 decades ago, it was not here in Nigeria, is what we call credit card fraud. And this is about unauthorized use of credit cards or credit information.
Okay.
Now, the manipulations, the main fraud that everybody, every time now you see people sending you text messages, that's what we call the bank fraud, manipulating bank accounts of transactions for personal gains.
Okay.
There is, because it's important we know that now that the country is calling for investment, we have to be very careful of what we call the investment frauds. That these are the scams involving stock bonds or other investment opportunities. With time, I believe that we'll also come into what we call the mortgage fraud. Misrepresenting information to secure mortgage loans and all that. Corporate fraud, investment fraud, bribery, and corruption. These are all frauds.
Right.
And I think that the country is now ripe to use the activities of the fraud examiners.
Okay, so Doctor, what you have enumerated is quite interesting, areas you have touched while you speak. But again, I'm concerned in Nigeria and probably other parts of Africa, but focus right now in Nigeria, for instance. How popular and effective is this practice?
Yes, let me quickly say that fraud examination involves. It is not static. For instance, the last 2 decades, we never had much about credit card fraud. But now that we are moving with technology, you will see that the frauds, different kinds of frauds will start manifesting. The practice of fraud examination in Nigeria, of course, has gained significant attention in recent years,
okay,
particularly in the financial sector. But however, its effectiveness and popularity vary across industries and organizations. Now, there are a few indicators of fraud examination in Nigeria. Number one, there is what we call the growing demand for fraud examination.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of services now, and people are in the business. As long as there is investment, as long as it has to do with finance, there will be fraud. And so the country must protect herself. Another key indicator is the professional certification. For instance, now the Institute of Fraud Examiners has its presence in Nigeria and offering certifications and training programs for professionals and non-professionals alike. We have gone into the area of moving fraud examination to the universities. And very soon we will want to go into the secondary school for them to know. The most important thing, like I used to tell people, it's important that you educate one of the ills of fraud,
Okay.
and then the security agencies catching them. Now, if one is aware of how not to commit fraud and the consequences of committing fraud, you will guide yourself. So information is very, very important and key, and that's what the Institute of Fraud Examiners is doing.
Okay.
Now, if you look at even the central bank, there's what we call the regulatory framework. The Central Bank of Nigeria and the Nigerian Stock Exchange have established guidelines. If you look at they've established guidelines and regulations to combat fraud and promote transparency. But let me quickly say here that in Nigeria, we have challenges. And these challenges are the challenges facing fraud examination. Number one, limited awareness. Many organizations, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, are not aware of the importance of fraud examination.
Right.
And again, of course, inadequate resources. Fraud examination requires significant resources, including expertise, technology, and funding.
All right.
And these are challenges.
Okay, so Doctor, and yes, so now with all of the challenges you have outlined, I'm sorry to cut you there, but again, you're touching a very important aspects of this program, and I'd like to ask you straight away, at the African Business School, an institute of fraud examiners where you are a learning advisor, what are the critical initiatives that you think have occurred to improve on the practice, to improve the challenges or address the challenges that you have just outlined?
Well, let me quickly say that the African Business School and the Institute of Fraud Examiners in Nigeria have undertaken several critical initiatives to enhance the practice of fraud examination. Now, number one, we have academic programs and trainings.
Okay.
In collaboration with the Babcock University, we have gone ahead to institute the PGD in fraud examination, and to increase the level of expertise. The Institute of Fraud Examiners right now offers training programs, including certification courses, workshops, and seminars, all to equip professionals with necessary skills to detect and prevent fraud.
Okay.
Now, the academic programs cover topics as principles of fraud examination, conducting internal investigations, auditing for internal frauds, and fraud prevention. Now, I believe, for one, that prevention is better than cure. And that is the area where fraud examiners come in.
Okay.
And I've always said it, that there are two sides to it. One, the academic side, the social side, to train people how not to commit fraud. And the other side, arresting the fraudsters. Now, what the Institute of Fraud Examiners do is to train people not to commit fraud and to tell them why it is not good to commit fraud. Whereas the security agencies are there to do their job, to arrest and to prosecute. So these are two different things. And that is why the role of fraud examiners in this country is very, very crucial and very important.
Okay.
Now we have also gone ahead. There are specialized courses. Like as I said, fraud examination spans through so many areas. In the Institute of Fraud Examiners, we look at three basic areas And these areas are the corporate governance fraud, the economic and financial fraud, and one important one for which we must, in fact, we need the assistance of the government and everyone, is what we call the political ethics and social responsibility fraud.
Okay.
Whether we like it or not, the politicians are there. And sometimes what they plan is what covers everywhere. And therefore, the political fraud is so important that, I have said that before anyone will go into contesting an election, he has to pass through the school of the Institute of Fraud Examiners because of the fraudulent practices in the political system. And again, if you look at what we call the social responsibility fraud, that is an area where people don't even think that you are doing something wrong.
Okay.
You are discussing with somebody and you are telling somebody the wrong thing in order to make profit.
Okay, so
that is fraud.
All right, so Doctor,
and therefore we'll try as much as possible. That is the area, and we have been doing that. We have been passing on through the training and retraining.
Okay, so lastly, I'd like to get it from you. What would you say now? Having identified the challenges and the efforts you are making to address them, I'd like to finally just ask you this: what would you say is the contribution of this practice to the business environment and the economic development? How intertwined is this?
Yeah. Fraud examination significantly contributes to business environment in so many ways, both economic development in the country and several ways. Now, if you look at the contribution of fraud examination to business environment, now you will see that the improved fraud examination will improve governance, because fraud examination promotes transparency, accountability, and good governance in Nigeria and in Nigerian business. Again, it will reduce financial losses, because when you identify and you prevent fraud activities, it minimizes financial losses and thereby protecting businesses and assets. It enhances risk management. Let me quickly say this, that stakeholders, the moment fraud examination is given its place in this country, you will see that the confidence of stakeholders will increase, and thereby making better decisions.
Okay. All right. So
now let me quickly.
Yeah, please. We have just 1 minute to round up. So give us your final thoughts on what you have begun, so that we can close from here.
Thank you. Let me quickly say that it is now very, very apt that the bill for the Institute of Fraud Examiners, which last was in the National Assembly, the Senate, with the journal number 05, volume 10, SB 27, and which was on the 25th of March 2013. That bill ought to be passed. And why is it necessary? Number one, a fraud examiner. In fact, I used to ask people, who is the auditor of the auditor? Now, we have some problems and challenges. If there is fraud in the government circle, and you now recruit a government officer to go and investigate fraud, there will be limitations. And therefore, fraud examiners who are supposed to be private investigators ought to be equipped so that there will be checks and balances.
Okay.
And I believe that the federal government, if we want to get it right, we must think about the private investigators.
All right.
Fraud examiners.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Gode Idaminabo, for your input there. The President and Leading Advisor, African Business School and Institute of Fraud Examiners. We want to say thank you very much for your time on Africa Weekly.